I'm Ivy Reynolds, 36 years old, working in corporate auditing in Denver, Colorado. That evening, I drove back to my parents' house after being invited for an important family discussion. Despite a lingering unease, I returned to the quiet suburb where I grew up. A street lined with amber maples in early fall, where my family's gray-blue wooden house stood still, untouched by time for the past 2 decades. In the kitchen, the bright ceiling light reflected off the worn oak dining table where my parents, Walter and Caroline, sat across from each other. Next to them were my 2 younger brothers, Mason and Dylan. The 31-year-old twins were unemployed, still living at home, constantly defended by my mother with her go-to phrase, "They're just finding their path, honey." The smell of pot roast and garlic bread drifted from the oven, stirring memories of childhood dinners, back when I thought this house meant belonging. But something in the air tonight felt as heavy as stone pressing on my chest. Asian. I had barely pulled out my chair when my mother spoke, her fingers gripping her napkin like a lifeline. "You came at the right time, Ivy. We need to talk about a family decision." My father, the stern man who once taught high school math, now retired, continued with a flat tone, like reading out test scores. "We've finalized our will, and we want you to hear it directly from us, so there's no confusion later." Mason leaned back, arms crossed, wearing a smug half-smile. Dylan shrugged, his face neutral, like he already knew what was coming. I hadn't said a word when my mother delivered the next line, like a bullet to the chest. "All the assets will go to Mason and Dylan. The house, the cabin in Estes Park, and the retirement accounts. You won't receive anything." For a moment, I thought I misheard. The room fell silent, suffocating. I looked at my mother, hoping she'd laugh it off. "Just kidding." But instead, she gave a firm nod. "Because you have a stable job and solid income, and the boys, they're still struggling. We think it's the fairest decision." I turned to my father, hoping for eye contact, even a flicker of discomfort, but he stared into his glass of water, never once lifting his gaze. It hit like a reopened wound, sharp and raw. "I've paid your mortgage for 5 years, I said, my voice trembling from hurt, not anger. "I covered over $18,000 in medical bills last year for Dad. And more than $25,000 for Mason every time he changed careers." My mother set her glass down slowly, her eyes cold. "And see, Ivy, you always make everything about money. You don't understand that family love can't be measured in receipts." "It's not about money," I replied, my hands clenched under the table. "It's about fairness, about showing up every time you needed me, only to be treated now like I don't exist." Mason laughed, the kind of laugh that belongs to people who've never had to carry anyone but themselves. "You just liked playing the martyr, and now you're upset no one's giving you a medal?" Dylan chimed in, grinning. "Maybe you thought if you threw enough cash around, they'd love you like some sitcom ending." Dream on. I turned back to my parents, waiting for them to intervene, to scold them. But silence. And in that silence I understood. I had no place in this family. Not if I wasn't paying for it. I took a deep breath, my chest tight. "If that's your choice," I said, unnervingly calm, "then I have one too." Mason raised an eyebrow, smirking. "Whether you gonna sue us?" I stood, sliding my chair back to the table. "From now on, don't expect a thing from me, not a cent, not a call, not a second chance." Then I walked out of that kitchen, past the simmering pot roast, the blinding overhead light, and 4 stunned faces too frozen to respond. No one stopped me. No one called my name. Only the sound of the door clicking shut. Final, deliberate, and without regret. I got back to my downtown Denver apartment just after 8 p.m., my heels tapping sharply against the hardwood floor in the silence. Without even taking off my coat, I headed straight to the dining table and opened my laptop. The bank dashboard lit up under the soft amber light. I stared at the list of active recurring payments. Each line cold and mechanical, like the heartbeat of a stranger. $1,850 per month for my parents. The remaining mortgage on the house in Boulder. $1,200 split between Mason and Dylan, a temporary living expense that became a permanent allowance. $275 for my father's health insurance. $190 for an internet service I never used but was in my name. I sat still, my hands trembling. Not from fear, but from fury at myself. Fury for letting it go on this long. It took less than 15 minutes to cancel them all. Each click felt like a clean, surgical cut. Recurring payment successfully canceled. 4 times in a row. I stared at the final confirmation as if it were a court sentence. Not for them, but for me. Not even 10 minutes later my phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "Mom." I wasn't surprised. I didn't answer. She called again. Once. Twice. On the 4th call, I picked up. "Ivy?" Her voice was sharp, breathless. "What the hell did you just do? Your father said the account didn't receive the payment this week, and the internet is down." I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm. "I just stopped doing what I should have stopped a long time ago." "Do you realize how this affects us?" she snapped, voice shaking. "This household depends on your support. We're family, Ivy. Families help each other." I squinted out the window at Denver's city lights fading behind the evening fog. "Family?" I said. "You talk like I've never done anything for this family. Like I haven't paid the mortgage, medical bills, utilities for 7 years. And now, just because I've done better than Mason and Dylan, I get erased from the will. You're making this more complicated than it is," she barked. "The inheritance was a hard decision. But you're not in need. Your brothers are struggling. They need a foundation." I let out a dry laugh. There was nothing funny about it. If I'm not in need, why does the entire house rely on my money to stay afloat? If money doesn't matter, then let Mason and Dylan pay the bills. The other end went silent. I knew that silence, not guilt, but being cornered with no response. "Ivy, you've become cold. This isn't the daughter I raised. You never really saw me, Mom. Just the credit card with my name on it." I ended the call, no waiting for her reply, no hesitation. 30 minutes later, Dylan texted. "Cut the internet? You trying to get us kicked out?" 1 minute after that, Mason messaged. "What game are you playing? This isn't funny." I didn't reply. I deleted both texts. Then the screen lit up again, with a bank notification. My mom had tried to withdraw from the joint account I set up years ago to cover Dad's medical bills. An account I had just emptied and permanently closed. I had finally done what I never dared. Closed every access point. I stepped onto the balcony, looking down at the stream of cars below. Denver buzzed and glowed as always. But inside me, for the first time, was silence. Not the kind that isolates, but the kind that frees. Another message chimed. I didn't check it. I closed my eyes and let the October wind push through my hair, stripping away years of burden. I was no longer the reliable daughter. The one who always did the right thing and paid the price for everyone. I was no longer the pillar propping up a so-called family duty, when what they really needed wasn't me, but my wallet. That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. No nightmares. No waking at midnight. No weight on my chest. The next morning my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I turned off the ringer and moved every family contact into a folder labeled permanent silence. Tuesday afternoon, I had just left a meeting with the senior audit board when my phone started buzzing non-stop inside my handbag. 7 missed calls from Dad, 5 texts from Mom, 3 from Dylan, and a 58-second voice message from Mason. I hadn't even reached my apartment when the family group chat on Facebook, usually just a space to ping me for my bank info, suddenly came alive in a way it hadn't in years. "Mason, what the hell is wrong with you? Mom and Dad are drowning in debt." "Dylan, You're a traitor. You live comfortably while we're barely surviving. Is that what you wanted? Mason, you're not part of this family anymore. Don't expect your name mentioned when we bury our parents. I leaned my head against the elevator wall, closing my eyes for a few seconds to contain the rage bubbling to my throat. It wasn't what they said that burned. It was knowing I'd already seen it coming. The next day, my mom emailed me. Ivy, the family is meeting this Saturday at 6 p.m. You have to be there. No explanation, no invitation, just a command. I almost didn't go. But then I thought, maybe they're remorseful. Maybe this isn't just another guilt trip. Maybe. I was wrong. So I went. When I walked into the living room, they were all already there. My father stood by the fireplace, hands in his pockets, his face carved from stone. My mother sat on the sofa, eyes swollen, gripping a tissue. Mason and Dylan stood with arms crossed, contempt in their eyes unfiltered. "You're here." "Sit down," my mother said hoarsely. "I can't take this anymore." I stayed on my feet. My father spoke, each word heavy as granite on tile. "You have no idea what you've done to your mother. Her stress is through the roof. Her blood pressure is high. She hasn't slept since you stopped helping us." I stared directly into his eyes. "Oh? Did she sleep just fine when I was working double shifts to pay off your medical debts?" "Ivy," my mom cried out. "How can you say that? I'm your mother. Don't I deserve your help?" I gave a soft, bitter laugh. "You call draining my finances for 10 straight years helping?" Mason jumped in, voice laced with venom. "You've got no heart. You made some money and now you think we're trash." Dylan sneered beside him. "Or do you think being an auditor makes you better than us?" I didn't flinch. "It's not what I do, it's what I won't do anymore. If this family only sees me as an ATM, then I don't want the label family at all." My mother burst into tears. "You're tearing this family apart over money." I tightened my grip on my bag strap. "No, Mom. The years of your silence tore it apart. Long before I did anything." No one said another word. The room fell into a suffocating hush. I turned and walked out, each step on the wood floor drawing a line I would never cross again. I left with a truth they were too afraid to say out loud. They never loved me for who I was. Only for what I could provide. And that night, for the first time in years, I blocked every family contact from my phone. Calls, texts, social media, everything. They can say whatever they want, call me a traitor, but I know this. Betrayal didn't come from me. It came from them. The moment they decided I was a wallet before I was a daughter. 3 days after the family meeting, I got home late from a presentation to the investment board. Light rain was falling, the air damp and cold. Perfect weather to shower and collapse into bed. But when I reached the door of my 9th-floor apartment, I stopped dead. The entire electronic lock and door handle had been sealed shut with thick gray industrial adhesive. A smooth, even layer. Still not fully dried. The chemical smell was fresh and overwhelming. I stood there, heart pounding. But my mind sharp. This wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. I pulled out my phone and opened the hallway camera app I had installed last year after a break-in in the building. Rewinding footage from earlier that day, I paused at 3:47 p.m. A man appeared. Baseball cap, surgical mask, red spray can in hand. When he bent down to check the door frame, the angle revealed enough. The sleeve of a gray hoodie I recognized instantly. Dylan wore it all last winter. But what sealed it was his left wrist. A small arrow tattoo just below the bone. That tattoo belonged to Mason. I narrowed my eyes, rewound again, and watched him press his fingers along the door's edge to inspect his handiwork. Then he walked away, unaware he had just been caught. I called building security and immediately reported it to the local police. Within 45 minutes, 2 officers arrived along with maintenance staff. They removed the adhesive with industrial tools. I handed over the video footage without hesitation. Officer Ray, a stern, composed man in his 50s, watched the clip, then turned to me. "Do you want to press charges for property vandalism?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes. I want Mason Reynolds to be held fully accountable. Without consequences, this won't stop." That evening, I received 3 missed calls from Dad. 1 text from Mom. "How could you call the police on your own brother? You're turning this family into enemies." No apologies, no one asked if I was safe, just blame, as always. I didn't respond. The next day, Mason called. I answered. He was already shouting. "You've completely lost it. You blew this out of proportion over a prank? You want to send me to jail?" I answered coldly. "If your prank left me locked out of my home, requiring police and a locksmith, then it's no prank. It's criminal." Mason scoffed. "How much? Just tell me, so I never have to see your face again." I glanced at the invoice from building management. $3,000. "You have 24 hours or I file a civil suit." That afternoon I received a bank notification. A deposit of $3,000 from MR Holdings. The transfer note read just 4 words. "Don't ever contact me." I set my phone down. No reply. There was nothing left to say. As dusk settled, I made a cup of ginger tea and sat alone by the window. Below, rows of golden streetlights stretched like rivers into the dark. I exhaled slowly. My family had taken another step, this time beyond conflict and into sabotage. I used to think that if I stepped away, they would fade out quietly. But no. They escalated. They turned the loss of their financial access into justification for personal destruction. And I understood something terrifying. This was never about love. It was about control. About ownership. And the moment I took that away, they saw me not as a daughter, but as a threat. I was checking work emails on Monday morning when a Facebook notification popped up on my phone screen. Caroline Reynolds just posted in the group, "Reynolds, Family and Friends." I'd never cared about that group, a place where distant relatives posted barbecue photos, wedding announcements, and shallow "family is everything" quotes. But the title of the post made me freeze. "When a daughter abandons her family for money." I tapped in. Of course it was my mother. A long, emotionally worded post. Careful not to mention my name. But everyone would know exactly who she meant. It breaks our hearts when the child we raised turns her back on us during hard times. We never asked for much. Just a little help to keep the house, to afford my husband's medication. But she has a career, money, and a frozen heart. Below were dozens of comments from relatives, neighbors, and Mom's old high school friends. "Kids today are so ungrateful. I've known Ivy since she was a baby. Can't believe she turned out so cruel. What's the point of success if you've lost your morals?" Then came a message from Aunt Sarah, Mom's cousin. "Ivy, is this true? How could you leave your parents like this?" A former high school classmate I hadn't spoken to in 15 years messaged me. "Not trying to judge, but if what's going around about your family is true, I'm really disappointed." I went stiff. They didn't know I'd been paying the mortgage for 5 years. No one mentioned that I'd spent over $60,000 in the last decade covering bills, medication, tuition, and credit card debt for both Mason and Dylan. No one brought up how Mason vandalized my door and was forced to pay $3,000 under police orders. I opened my laptop. I had no reason to stay silent anymore. I went to my profile and hit Create Post. If my mother wants to tell a story, then here's mine. Over the past 10 years, I paid $1,850 per month toward the majority of my parents' mortgage. $1,200 per month for Mason and Dylan for emergency help, a stretch that lasted 6 uninterrupted years. $17,300 for my father's hospital bills. $4,200 in tuition for Dylan, who dropped out of college 3 times. $8,000 for Mason to buy a car, to find work which he used instead for vacation trips with his girlfriend. I also covered health insurance, electric bills, internet, and multiple home repairs, all in my name, never thanked. When I stopped providing financial support, I didn't get calls of concern or apology. Just threats, insults, and more recently, vandalism by Mason that forced me to involve the police and demand a $3,000 settlement. I've never rejected love, but I refuse to be used. Family is not a place where one person is drained dry so others can live in comfort. If you call what I've done ungrateful, then ask yourself, who never once showed gratitude? I hit post. In less than 2 hours, the post had over 60 shares. Comments poured in. Some still sided with Mom and scolded me. But to my surprise, many previously silent relatives started asking questions. I didn't know Ivy contributed that much. If what Ivy said is true, this isn't as simple as Caroline made it sound. Then came a private message from Aunt Daisy, the one relative I always loved most. You don't owe anyone an apology. I've known for a long time, but I was too scared to speak up. You did the right thing. That night, Mom called. I answered calmly. Ivy, what did you just do? The whole family's in chaos. I told the truth, and if the truth embarrasses you, that's because you chose to shame me first. She paused, then her voice dropped cold. You're tearing this family apart. I smiled, not bitter, just tired. Mom, the family didn't fall apart because I spoke. It broke when you chose to bury the truth just to earn more pity. After that post, my phone went eerily silent. No more endless messages from my mother. No missed calls from my father. No sarcastic jabs from Mason and Dylan. The family group chat, once buzzing with daily notifications, now displayed a single gray line. Ivy Reynolds was removed from the group. I thought I'd feel empty. But I didn't. Not this time. Instead, I felt order. No more late-night calls asking, "Can you cover the electric bill this month?" No more weekend mornings starting with, "Mason's unemployed again." Or, "Dylan got dumped, he needs a few weeks to rest in Florida." The quiet in my apartment no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like freedom. I returned to work with a clarity I hadn't known in years. No more mental juggling between client audits and wondering whether my parents could afford their insurance premiums. Every thought now pointed in one direction. Me, and my path forward. 3 weeks later, during a mid-quarter review meeting, our executive director asked me to stay behind after everyone else had left. She closed her laptop, peering over the rim of her half-fame glasses. Ivy, I'll be blunt. You're the only person on the team who hasn't missed a single deadline in 3 straight quarters. I nodded quietly. And your handling of the Valora financial restructuring? They signed a 3-year retainer with us. That's never happened before. I still didn't say a word. I've never been the type to brag. Oh, starting next month, I want you as our new regional audit director for the Northwest. Your salary will be adjusted accordingly, but I'll need an answer within 48 hours. I stood, shook her hand. I won't need 48 hours, Ms. Collins, I accept. That evening, I opened a bottle of red wine, one I'd been saving for years, never quite feeling like I deserved to celebrate. I stood on my balcony as the first chill of autumn brushed my face. The Rockies loomed faintly in the distance. The city below still buzzed, but within me, peace. For the first time in years, I celebrated a win without hiding it, without bracing for the inevitable message from my mother. Congrats, but can you help Dylan with his car insurance? No more but. No more strings attached to every step forward. This success was mine, fully, unapologetically. I set down the glass and walked back inside, opening my personal email. There was a message from an unfamiliar address. An old college friend, now an advisor for a nonprofit. She wrote, I read your post about your family. I never knew you'd been through so much, but the way you wrote, honest, grounded, never blaming, made me wonder. Would you be willing to share your story in a panel on women and family pressure in American culture? I read the message twice. Part of me wanted to say no. After all, silence had been my safety for years. But I'm not there anymore. I typed 2 lines. I'd be honored to speak. I know I'm not the only one who's lived this. When I hit send, I didn't realize this would be the first time my story was truly heard, not as a tragedy, but as a declaration of the right to live for myself. I booked a ticket to Florence on a November morning, just as the cold had swept through Denver and the first snow still lingered on the rooftops. The flight lasted 10 hours, with a layover at JFK, then straight into Peretola Airport. I didn't tell anyone, didn't pack expectations. I only knew I needed to stand somewhere no one knew my name. The city revealed itself with blazing red roofs, cobbled streets, and church bells chiming like the soul's internal clock. I rented a small apartment near Piazza Santo Spirito, where the balcony faced a stretch of honey-colored domes glowing in the afternoon light. On my second evening in Florence, I sat in a quiet café called Café degli Artisti. It was a modest place, hushed, filled only with the dense scent of espresso and the sound of pages turning at the next table. I was scribbling a few lines into my notebook when a soft male voice came from across the table. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" I looked up. A man in his 40s, tall, with chestnut hair tinged with gray at the temples, wore a tweed coat and held a hardcover book. He smiled. "Go ahead," I nodded. He pulled out the chair, sat down and opened his book, but didn't read. After a moment, he said, "I'm guessing you're not Italian. But the way you watch things, it's like you've been here a while." I let out a soft laugh. Maybe I just noticed too much because I've never been allowed to slow down. He tilted his head, not judging, just listening. "I'm Julian, from Boston. I'm an interior architect, but lately I've been spending time wandering Europe to..." Pause. Life. I didn't ask why. He didn't ask what I did. We only talked about Florence. About rooftops that curve like waves. The sound of a violin from a second-floor window. The glow of amber light behind wrought iron frames. We saw each other again the next day, pure coincidence, at a second-hand bookstore by the Arno. Then again, at the flea market near San Lorenzo. By the third time, I offered, "If you don't mind, I know a place that makes the best walnut toast in Florence." He smiled. "I'll follow, you lead." That's how we began spending time together. No schedules, no expectations. Just warm coffee in the mornings by the window, late afternoon walks through golden alleys, and shared bottles of Chianti on an old rooftop terrace. Julia never asked about my family. He never pretended to understand or offered shallow advice. He just listened when I talked, and when I didn't, he stayed silent. The kind of gentle silence I'd never known before. One evening, as we sat on the steps of Santa Croce, I said without thinking, "I used to believe that if I gave enough my family would finally see me. But in the end, they only saw what I brought, not who I was." Julien turned toward me, eyes softening. "Maybe it's because they only knew how to love what they needed. And you're learning how to love yourself without needing a reason." I looked up at the Florence night sky. Deep black, starless. But beneath it, the entire city shimmered, as if lit from within. I returned to Denver after 3 weeks in Florence, feeling as light as if I'd just shed an old skin that had clung to me for far too long. I restarted my work routine, but this time, not to prove anything to anyone. This time, I was investing in myself. I had quiet mornings, unhurried evening walks, and a reading list no longer interrupted by desperate text messages. One morning in late December, just as I was making coffee, my phone buzzed. A message from Lori, my distant cousin on my mother's side. It was a single line. "Ivy, you should know. your parents are working night shifts at the warehouse in South Aurora. I froze for a moment, coffee still tilting in my hand. I didn't respond right away. By noon, another message came in. This one from an old college friend of Dylan's. He's working part-time at a car wash. Got kicked out of his apartment for not paying rent. I wasn't surprised. And strangely, I didn't feel hurt. I knew why they ended up that way. They never learned to stand on their own feet. For years, I had unknowingly become their crutch, one they never wanted to let go of, until I pulled away and they fell. Not because I wished for it, but because I couldn't live forever under the weight of borrowed gratitude that was never returned. That evening, I pulled a red card from my drawer. This Christmas at Ivy's place, only for those who know what real love means. I sent it to a small group of friends, and one relative I still stayed in touch with, Aunt Beth. Aunt Beth, my mother's younger sister, was the only one who quietly reached out after my article went public. You didn't do anything wrong, I always saw how they used you. But I never had the courage to say it. On the afternoon of December 24th, she was the first to arrive. She brought a tin of ginger cookies, a bottle of warm apple cider, and a hand-knit wool bracelet. Did you know this is the first Christmas invite I've received since 2012? I smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. Then we'll make this one count. My friends trickled in after that. Co-workers, neighbors, 2 college classmates. No one mentioned family. No one asked who I was angry with. They simply brought food, kind wishes, and the most precious thing of all, their presence, given freely. We had dinner around the long wooden table, candlelight casting shadows on the walls. There was laughter and moments of silence that didn't feel awkward. A little neighbor kid crawled into my lap and asked, "Miss Ivy, do you have any family?" I nodded, then pointed around the table. "This is my family." Later that night, when most had gone, Aunt Beth and I stood on the balcony, watching soft snow begin to fall. "Still no word from your mom?" she asked. I shook my head. "And I'm not hoping for any." She didn't lose touch. She chose silence. And I'm choosing not to open that door again. She didn't say anything more, just gently squeezed my hand. I stepped back inside, looking at the cleaned-up table, chairs neatly pushed in. No noise, no chaos. Yet my heart felt full. Every space in me, once reserved for waiting, had been filled by people who truly saw me. I don't know how my parents or my siblings will get through this winter. I don't know if they'll resent me forever. But I know one thing for certain. I don't owe them any salvation. Lived for them for far too long. Now, I choose to live for myself. And that was the first Christmas gift I ever gave myself. The gift of peace that needed no permission. January in Denver usually hits like a slap, sharp, cold and unforgiving. But this year, something about the air felt softer. Not because the weather was milder, but because my mind wasn't bracing itself for another guilt-laced call or a manipulative message wrapped in the word "family." I woke up on a Sunday morning, with sunlight cutting through the curtains, casting a glow on the bookshelf where I kept the only childhood photo I still owned. Me at 8, sitting alone under the maple tree behind our house, clutching a frayed cloth doll. No one else in the frame. I hadn't noticed it then, but now it was painfully clear. I had always been there, alone. Even in a house full of people. Everything changed the day they removed me from the will. At the time, it felt like the cruelest kind of rejection. But now, I see it for what it was. The first honest thing they had ever done for me, and strangely, it was a gift. A gift called freedom. Because only when I was no longer expected to be anything for them was I free to be everything for myself. I'm no longer the daughter who has to open her wallet to be heard. No longer the sister who absorbs everyone's failures. No longer the child who was never allowed to be fragile. I am Ivy Reynolds, 36, living alone on the 10th floor, with a job I love, a few good friends, and a peace I once believed only existed in movies. I spend my evenings with books, paintings, and pottery classes. I take weekend walks with Aunt Beth, and sometimes cook dinner for the elderly neighbor downstairs. I don't do it to be seen. I do it because it fills me up. One late afternoon, while finishing a project report, I received an email from Julian, the man I met in Florence. "I'll be in Seattle soon for a design project. If you happen to be around, let me buy you a coffee. Just coffee, no expectations, just like Florence taught us to live." I stared at the words and smiled. I didn't know yet how I'd reply. But I did know this. I was no longer afraid of connection. Because now, I was strong enough to choose. And I would only keep what didn't demand sacrifice as proof of worth. Family, I've learned, isn't always tied by blood. It's made of people who make you feel lighter in their presence. Who don't use love as leverage. Who see you and stay. I used to think that if I tried a little harder, stayed a little quieter, gave a little more, they would accept me. But the truth is, love shouldn't cost you your sense of self. I'm no longer waiting for anyone's approval. I don't need thank yous. I don't need apologies, and I definitely don't need an invitation to return. I closed my notebook, stood up, and stepped onto the balcony. Below, snow had begun to drift softly onto bare tree limbs. Everything looked harsh, but beautiful, in its own way. Like me, still here after everything. Not broken, not shattered, just steadier, wiser, and freer than ever before. Ivy's story is a clear reminder that family ties should never be used to exploit some exploitation. In real life, some people show up only when your material value benefits them, and call it love. Setting boundaries isn't betrayal, it's the brave act of self-protection. Sometimes, the greatest gift isn't being accepted, it's being cut off, so you can finally live freely, true to your own worth, and no longer carry anyone else's weight. What do you think about Ivy's decision? Was she too harsh? Or just claiming what she truly deserved? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and life.